All right. Last session of the day. Here's the hardcore people who's been here all day. Thank you all for still being with us. We might have left the best for last, at least if you're interested in players and what they are up to nowadays. The next panel is called New Phase of Publishing, Players as Creators, Marketers, and Partners. And we'll talk a little bit more about UGC and modding and all kinds of stuff that players can now do themselves to do stuff that before only game developers could do. To moderate this panel, we have Alex Bergendahl, who is the CEO of LootLocker, but has 2 decades in different roles as a CEO and COO, being a serial entrepreneur. Among other things, he helped HatRabbit to sell their business to King a couple of years ago. He will be joined on stage by Emma Farrow from Avalanche, Jamin Smith from Pantaloon, Gustav Linde from The Gang, and Gregory Weller from Generation Media. Please welcome on stage.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the evening session. I hope you brought a drink with you. We have a really exciting group here to talk about the new phase of publishing, and what we mean by that is, we've lived in a world where publishers and developers have been the ones to build the games and market the games, and then the players have been the ones to consume the games. And now things have kind of changed a little bit, where now players are equally involved in the development process and can also act as marketing and community managers and get really involved. Before we start, I want to just mention a change of programming. Charlotte, who was supposed to join us, unfortunately could not make it. So instead we have Greg Weller here, who was kindly filled in the last minute. So before we dive into things, I thought maybe we could have a little introduction of everyone here, starting with Emma.
Yes, hello. I'm Emma Farrow. I'm the Chief Publishing Officer at Avalanche Studios Group, based up in Stockholm. We are best known for some of our games like The Hunter, Just Cause, Mad Max. And within the realm of publishing, I oversee our marketing efforts, our data and insights collection, our publishing services, and our partnerships for all of our self-published games. And yeah, I think very excited to talk about the topic today, because I think the old way of publishing, where a developer makes the game, the publisher picks it up, and it's kind of thrown over the fence, and then that's the first time that we're really getting the game in the player's hands, just doesn't work anymore. And so really looking forward to hearing more from my fellow panelists.
Great, Jamin.
Hey, I'm Jamin. I've fairly recently founded a new publishing label called Pantaloon, which is dedicated to bold and bizarre sort of indie games. We're very much trying to put the player at the heart of that mission, and doing some interesting stuff with our marketing to try and kind of bring the games themselves to the campaigns and try and make the weight sort of interesting, if that makes sense. Most of my background has been in more traditional publishing. Most of my career was at Square Enix. I've also worked for indie studios, and I've released a couple of games by myself, not very successfully. So I've kind of seen both sides of the fence and trying to bring those learnings to the new label.
Gustav?
I'm Gustav Linde, one of the founders of The Gang. We have been around for about 6 years, work mostly on Roblox. I know absolutely nothing about publishing, but I've released over 100 games, so there's something, I guess.
Greg?
Hi, my name's Greg. I'm the head of gaming partnerships at Generation Media. I basically try and find partners who are looking at new pathways to kind of getting their games to market outside of the traditional publishing model, of which I've spent 20 years kind of working in under Rockstar Games, Bethesda Softworks, and most recently Team 17. So it's been really interesting in those kind of 20 years to see how the dynamic has shifted with kind of that kind of publisher holding all the cards to, upstarts and new studios kind of being able to take their game to market very much on the back of the kind of, fans and community that kind of rally behind it and support it. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to seeing how this topic develops on stage.
Awesome, thank you. So as you all heard now, we have 4 experts from 4 different parts of the industry. We have sort of the AA, AAA publishing from Avalanche. We have indie publishing with Jamin from Pantaloon. We have the Roblox games and the entire UGC world with Gustav. And Greg brings a new element to it, representing sort of everything in between, I guess. So the way I like to think about this sort of new ecosystem that's evolving with the players is a sort of continuous loop of communicating to the players about, you know, with your intentions as a developer or publisher, the actual engagement with the players where you're playtesting games, releasing games as early as possible, and then there's a listening and responding to the players before then taking that feedback back, improving the game, and then communicating how you've made these changes. So let's start things off. Let's use that format and sort of structure this talk this way. Let's start off with communicating. You know, Jamin, as an indie publisher, I think a lot of people here are on the indie side. You know, how do you communicate with your audience, the players?
Yeah, it's an interesting question for us because it's how actually the label was born, was out of that question. Before we transitioned into the publishing world and model, we ran a newsletter. The newsletter was a way for us to become a kind of a tastemaker of sorts for the types of games that we were then looking to publish and put a stamp on. So we tried to kind of bring together, you know, certain types of players that are all hungry for a certain type of experience and then pivot into the publishing world from there. So I'm a huge believer that one-to-one communication is hugely powerful, and that publishers are only really scratching the surface of what's possible there. You know, I'm not here to kind of, you know, put a huge downer on social media and kind of, you know, I'm not here to demonize social media, but there's a lot of, you know, inherent problems and constraints with social media, and you're very much, you know, beholden to the algorithms, and those can very much limit your reach and your engagement. And I've seen that firsthand, and I think a lot of studios have seen that firsthand. Whereas with a newsletter, you know, your audience, you can not control is the wrong word, but you can engage with them more directly on a more personal and authentic level. Not just because of kind of, you know, audience segmentation. You can hit players that like specific genres or on certain platforms or of certain age ranges. You know, it's very specific and very tailored. But at Pantaloon, we're trying to kind of think about that more deeply and work out how we can then put those hooks into the games themselves, and start bringing the game experience and narrative out of the game itself and into the inbox. So, for example, you know, you might choose path A in your, you know, in the game that you're playing, but we can then serve you lore and content and more sort of narrative flavor from route B that you didn't take. So we're really thinking, you know, deeply and richly about how we can use email in a really formative way. So I'm basically here to bang the drum about email and one-to-one communication today.
But do people even use email? I mean, the new generation of players, do they have inboxes that they check?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think they do. And you know, I think there's a spectrum here of where people sort of, you know, spend their time. I'm a believer that the inbox is the most powerful place to be, regardless of sort of demographic questions. But you know, it's also a very blended approach. I'm not here to say, you know, just use email, because that would be foolish. It's very much part of a variety of different comm strategies, and you should deploy all of them in tandem and just work out where your strengths lie as a studio or a publisher, and then use those channels accordingly.
Interesting. Gustav, with Roblox, you can't use email, I guess.
No, email is probably something that they have never heard about, but Discord is very, very big. I think among the top 15 Discord servers in the world, 5 of them are Roblox games. So it is kind of native. And for a long time, Discord was the only way to communicate two-way with Roblox players, because everything in the chat and message service was censored. But since a few months back, Roblox has built into a feedback system where players can drop feedback to players, to developers. And we see which kind of like device, OS, and all of the metadata, and we get their feedback directly. That one has helped a lot, because the problem, I guess, with Discord, and I can only speak from our experience, but every means of communication is that it is the most hardcore players that will take their time to join our Discord and talk to us. And if you balance your game to that one, you're going to balance it for the top 1%. And Roblox, at least, is a platform that is mass market. Like, you need to reach like 10 million monthly active users or more for a game to be successful. So we can't listen to the top 1% and tune the game to them. We need to collect the feedback even from the players that are not as committed to the game to join our social media. But the feedback system has been very helpful for that.
We'll get to responding to feedback a little later. Emma, at Avalanche, how do you guys approach communicating with your play testers?
Well, I think it's really important to be where your players are and be where they're already communicating, how they want to communicate with you, and not necessarily create new pathways that they're not familiar with interacting on. And so I think you can segment it to your most engaged players, right, who tend to be on Discord. They tend to be on the channels that you've created, your own channels. And then you need to have a really involved way of communicating with them, not just the community managers, but bring the developers who they really want to learn from and see the behind the scenes from. And then there's the potential audience, right? The potential playtesters. And then you need to have a slightly different strategy for bringing them deeper into that loyalty and habit forming funnel. So I would say it's regular, and it's all to do with the channel strategy that you create. Whether it's Discord, whether it's in your game, because to that point, right, there are avenues on Steam or through the consoles to communicate. On the platforms, there are avenues in your own game to create ways of putting out news or tutorials, and you need to have a different strategy for all of those to communicate with that specific breadth of targeted audience. And then when you come to the playtesting for new potential games, or that's a whole different thing, and maybe we can get back into on the feedback loops.
Yep. How do you find these potential playtesters in the first place?
For us, we first go to the community that we already have, and when all else fails, we buy them.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Buying them can be done in a variety of ways. One of those ways is with creators, is finding a streamer that is with an existing audience, and inviting them to play. Greg, is this something that you have an opinion on?
Yeah, I remember many years ago, just as kind of the emergence of influencers were kind of coming through on YouTube, being able to just kind of contact them directly and just say, hey, we like what you're doing, here's a t-shirt, keep going, and then that would be, they'd absolutely love that, and they kind of keep generating more content, and then eventually be coming in. And there was a bit, I don't know if you guys experienced this as well, there was a kind of period where there was some kind of friction between this new model of influencers coming in and the traditional kind of PR model. Journalists were a bit kind of aggravated that people who they felt hadn't got quite the same degree of experience were suddenly getting the same access. But fast forward, I think gone are the days. I've spoken to many of the kind of developers on the floor about obviously, how you're able to kind of cut through and engage amongst the other 18,000 games that are being released on Steam every year plus. And I think gone are the days where you could just, contact an influencer directly and kind of just give them some Steam codes and see content organically happen that way. A lot of them now are kind of shielded behind management companies and kind of high fees. And I think it takes a lot more work as well to actually find those ones who've got, on the up. They've maybe got under 100, under 1,000 subscribers who will do that, but that suddenly becomes more of a resource drain, and especially if you are a small studio with only 1 to 10 people who are working on the game, how you then are able to justify carving out time from developing the game to spending ages and hours crawling through YouTube to find those people, it can be very challenging.
And then when it comes to the feedback a little bit, Gustav, you mentioned, you can't just listen to the 1%. If you have a creator involved in the development, playtesting this game, they have, potentially because of their audience size, a little bit more of a voice to give you feedback. But they are, they're the 1% of the 1%. How do you find a balance there, I guess, for any of you?
I think we'd always refer to them as the vocal minority a lot of the time, so it can be difficult kind of trying to work out what feedback is actually appropriate for the overall player base, because the ones that are raising the kind of temperature in the room are usually sometimes the minority of people, and that's not reflective of what everybody else wants in the game. So I think the first hurdle is actually working out what the feedback is, and actually if it is relevant and appropriate to moving forward on your game development in the best way.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think for us, we have two very distinct ways of collecting feedback. One on our live games, and then one through our incubation program, where we're trying to find our next game. And within the incubation program, it really is, are we building the right game for the target audience that we've set out to build it for? And that's the major question that we need to answer. And so I think in that case, we do want to listen, frankly, to the vocal minority, because they are the very specific core audience that we're trying to build around first. And then as we get deeper into the development and we go further into pre-production, production, then we start building out for, okay, then now how do we bring in the next layer and the next layer and scale that way? But if you don't build the core experience in the way that the vocal minority that you're trying to build for is going to love, not just like, right, but want to build their community around, want to make it a habit that they form over time, then what's the chance of success if you're trying to build for such a broad swath that you kind of lose the interest for everyone?
What do you think? Do you think that the general audience of players have matured to understand sort of the iterative development cycle? I mean, I built a game 10 years ago, and I feel like even then a lot of people did not really understand how games are made. And yes, we wanted their inclusion, but they didn't really understand what it meant to actually make changes and how long it could potentially take. For any of you, really, I mean, I guess the biggest comparison between is Gustav with Roblox and Emma with Avalanche. Like, does your audience understand how this iterative system works?
I think something that we must try to remember is that this is our trade. Like, we work with this because we are good at it and we have a passion about it. And a lot of the community members, they have a lot of passion, but maybe they don't have the broader perspective. Like, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm not a big fan of democracy when it comes to games. Like, you can't let 1 million people decide on your game direction. You still need to have a solid idea and believe in the game that you want to make. In the end, it is some kind of culture and art that we're trying to make. We are trying to take something that we came up with in our minds and show it to the rest of the people. It's not their product, it's our product. It is very important to find the pain points and help us polish the product. And you should do that with a mix of, and I'm going to sound like a mobile games company, but you should be data-driven. Like, you should have your funnel see drop-off, and you should correlate that with the feedback. Like, you can see that people drop off in stage 3 in your onboarding, and then you have the feedback where people say, like, this was confusing, I didn't understand what to do. So it doesn't mean that it took too long to do that step. It means that it was confusing. And I think, like, there is no silver bullet. Like, but you also need to stay strong in your vision about the game. Like, that was the most vague answer I have ever given a question, but I think it's very important to talk about this, like how it's not only data-driven, it's not only community-driven, it's about us building a product that we come up with. Like, it is our idea as game devs.
I couldn't agree more. I think you see a lot of that happening in Hollywood, as where the film has been watered down by a democracy of producers, and the end product is something that just isn't satisfying to fans. So I think you do have to kind of go in hard of your direction and your belief to make sure that that kind of product actually is authentic to what you set out to achieve.
But on the flip side, you have an example with like the Sonic movie, which the vocal minority of people on YouTube hated the original Sonic. And
I don't think it was a vocal minority. I mean, it was pretty unanimous.
No, but I think to that point, you need to know what feedback to take, right? And that's where your innate knowledge and experience as a game developer and as your craftsmanship comes in, where you can't take every little piece of feedback. That will absolutely dilute the idea. And for us, when we're playtesting, it's not how do we change this game to match your exact vision as a player. It's are we making the right game that we understand what we're trying to build and it appeals to you, not color by numbers in the game that we're building. So I think you do need to have a very holistic view from telemetry, collecting the right data, having the market insights, understanding the opportunity, taking the player anecdotal and quantitative feedback, right? There's so many inputs that you need, but at the end of the day, it's the developer who's making the game, and they should use that information to guide their thinking and make the best decision, not be beholden to it.
Always reminds me of that famous Henry Ford quote where he basically says, like, if I'd have listened to the populace of the times, we would have made a faster horse and not a car. Like, you've got to lead with your vision, as you were saying, and let passion and expertise drive and not the loudest voices. But it's interesting hearing the counters to it. But,
And while we'll deal with the feedback part later, what I'm actually trying to drill in on is, does the audience understand what you're trying to achieve? That they're playing a game that's, white boxed, in very early stage, buggy, missing content, and that maybe next week there will be changes that they'll come back and they'll see, and they understand that they have to look past some of these things, or that their feedback may be listened to, may not be listened to, etc.
Yeah, I think you need to set expectations really clearly and really often, because people don't tend to take it in the first time, but at the same time, probably you are going to lose a set of the audience because they go, oh, this game is so early and buggy, even though you've brought them into the test with that very expectation. So I think you need to just understand that no matter how well you communicate, and you should do your very best there, you will lose people's attention and they're not going to understand the concept.
I think it's quite, if I'm to put myself in the shoes of, the players for a minute, there's a lot of lexicon and jargon to some extent here, right? We've got obviously playtests, which we're talking about more as a function of development and production. But obviously you've then got public demos, you've got betas, closed betas, open betas, you've got early access. And to some extent, I think, people are coming into any of these pieces of content with the same expectations and the same mindset, and it almost doesn't matter what you call it, that their expectations are similar. So I think a lot of it is in brand and kind of like, how do you serve up this thing that you've made in a way that makes sense and gets you what you need out of it, but at the same time makes sense? Because it is confusing. There's a lot of wordage there that you need to kind of understand, and I think we all inherently understand it because we're industry, but there is an education to that, and it goes hand in hand with open development and bringing your player from the start of this journey through to your 1.0, and there is an education there that is very important to then the success of the game and the expectation management, I think.
Because I could imagine, players rubbing their hands together saying, I get to play this Avalanche game, thinking of Just Cause and all these amazing open world AA, AAA experiences that you guys have built. And then they open it and it's, missing content and buggy and animations aren't final. And they're just like, what is this crap? Yeah,
and I think you have to be really selective of the type of audience that you're bringing in for these play tests as well, that they understand the concept of, they are, and you can make them feel really special about it too. It's like, oh, you're getting a first look. You are one of the first people to ever experience this game, and you can help us craft where it goes. So I think there's the expectation setting. There's also making them feel like part of it. And then there's giving really regular and constant updates along the way. So, let's say they're in a Discord to be part of this playtesting group, and then the developers come a week after the playtest, and they're like, hey, look at this cool thing that we changed based on the feedback that we had from the playtest last week, and here's behind the scenes of the next evolution. So I think it's about really regular conversation, but also then making sure to say, when is the next stage coming, if you want them to be along for the long term.
I think, I definitely agree with what everyone said. And I think transparency and about where you're at with the game and what you're actually showing or providing a user goes such a long way. But I think another factor as well is the average age of a gamer now is in the kind of mid to late 30s, and this is that's an age group that kind of grew up with floppy disks and shareware and demo disks on magazines and stuff. So there's always been a degree of kind of early access or kind of pre-release kind of content in different formats. So I think largely, yes, there's lots of language and pre-alphas and what you've just kind of mentioned can be quite confusing, but as long as that's kind of carefully messaged in the kind of conduit of how it's being accessed, I think, you've got to give some credit to the kind of user base in terms of them understanding what they're being shown and presenting it. And probably the best example of all of that is Minecraft, in terms of obviously how that's kind of grown and developed with the community from kind of, pre-alpha, early access demos, or whatever you want to call it, all the way through to the kind of blockbuster movie that just kind of came out last year.
Well, from talking about communicating to now, perfect segue to talking about actually playing. I think what I'd like to start with is, Gustav and Emma, your two companies have two, very different ways of delivering play tests, if we call them that. Could you maybe just spend a minute and just explain, what is your testing approach, and how long do you test for? How do you release these games? How are they actually consuming this?
Yeah, I can start. So for us, as we're looking at new games, and again, we do testing on live games too, but I'll focus just on the new games. We want to test very early and very often. And so that's going to mean something very different, I think, when you're talking about Roblox, early and often. But for us, on a PC console experience, what we have established is, let's say, regular cycles of about 4 months, where we then take the game that's made by a very small team of all people who are in the weeds. They're all kind of acting as generalists because 5 people, you can't get a very specialized much of anything. And then at the end of that period, you bring it to the players. And again, very specific targeted audience. We screen for the types of games that they like to play and make sure it's the audience that we're actually targeting with the game. And then we take that and we review, again, where the game is, how confident the team feels, what the data says, and then we decide, do we want to keep doing that? And really, that kind of cycle will continue throughout all of the development. So regular check-ins, and we've, every game, every company, and every platform is going to require different cycles, but that's what's worked for us.
Gustav?
It's very different on Roblox, I would say. There is no concept of early access. Everything is early access. I think the highest pace we've had is where we release a game every week for a couple of months straight. And basically it's about coming up with a fun idea, creating the first basic playable of the game, throwing it out there, telling people try this game out, did you like it, what did you like, what did you not like, and then look at the data. And if it is kind of like throwing shit at a wall and see what sticks. If it sticks and if we feel passionate about it, we'll keep working on the game. But yeah, it's early access on crack. So it's very, very different. Roblox is not the only thing I've done. I've worked with Facebook games, mobile games, PC, console, everything. And the pace of this is insane, but it's also very, very fun because the community is so involved. Some people get super passionate about the game that is about surviving a trip with Ryanair's, or a game about, our biggest game is about being strong. You need to work out to be able to pull a tractor. It's stupid ideas, and you throw them out so fast that you don't really have a plan for it. You react to how people react to it.
I mean, that game, you made that game in a meeting, right?
Yeah. So that was 4 hours. We throw together that game in 4 hours, and we reached about 80 million people. 10% of the US has played that game.
Pretty productive meeting.
So yeah, it was. No, so I think it's so different. This is what I've done for the last 6 years, that I've lost touch with the rest of the industry a bit, and but it works in the end. We're trying to sell our ideas to other people, and we need to show them as quick as possible, because I have really stupid ideas as well. And most of them don't work. So it's better to test that early instead of investing 4 years in development and then showing it to people. And everyone's like, this idea sucks.
Yeah, fail fast, right?
Yeah, fail fast is and that's what it is, and it's a buzzword, but it works. Like today, it's so quick to make games, so you can really accelerate your failure to find these success stories.
Jamin, you're publishing indie games. Failing fast isn't really an option when you're picking up a game that's already in development.
It's not. No, we've got to be very careful with the selection, obviously. But I'm also a big sort of believer that you can have too much criteria and too many validation points, and sort of you can be too much in your head. And I think a lot of this is and should be gut. And the role of a publisher is to take a risk and to take a gamble on a project that you think could be great. And I think, if you're too cautious of, is it a first-time developer? Have they shipped a game before? Have they got all this history that you might need? Have they got a Discord of size X? Have they got this many newsletter subscribers? Whatever those criteria might be, you can end up saying no to gold. So we've got a kind of a very mission-led sort of philosophy where we want to be led by gut and sort of do the job of taking on some risk. That's what a publisher should be doing, I believe. Otherwise, you get into this paradox of publishing where, a studio is going to come to you with a game that has all these incredible proof points and validation markers, whatever they might be. And if all those are in place, chances are that studio probably doesn't quite need a publisher in the same way anyway. And I always tell studios I work with, if you can self-publish, you should, genuinely. But that's a luxury. If you're in the position where you can self-publish, you're probably coming off the back of existing success. You've probably got a bit of cash in the bank. You've probably got in-house marketing expertise. So it is a luxurious position for sure.
And you mentioned just before we started talking about playtesting, you talked about all the different ways of playtesting, not just the early stuff that Avalanche is doing or the early but still live testing that Roblox does. You also have betas that come right before there. That's basically marketing, right? How do you approach that? Yeah,
it is interesting because most of my career playtests have been a moment in a gate process. So, we'll have our gate 3 for the alpha build or something, and we'd have to then, conduct the playtest, get that user score, get your NPS number, and present that back to the higher ups. And it was very much just an exercise in ticking boxes. I've tried to sort of extend the philosophy of that and work out how we can use more meaningful playtests as part of the marketing campaigns and really kind of elevate them into the core of the incentivization of kind of being involved in the marketing of these games. So yes, they can be an incentive. We can run a campaign where a playtest spot is an incentive for signing up to the newsletter or completing. We run these kind of little puzzles, and if you complete some of these ARG puzzles, you can gain a spot in the next playtest and see behind the curtain and really insert yourself into the development of the game. So I think we can be broadening how we think about these bits of early code and really leveraging them in a way that ultimately makes the game more commercial, because that's right. We've got to sell these things. We've got to make sure that these studios are covering their rents and paying for their kids' food and all these kind of things that don't get talked about too often, but it's the brutal truth of game publishing. And if we can make sure that these early bits of code are leveraged against that final result, then great. It's more. We can work with more, and I think it's a really unexplored part of the marketing machine, actually.
It's interesting to hear you say kind of treating the playtest as a proof point as part of the milestones, because we do have milestones and we have the playtest and they're generally lumped together. But we actually almost see this as more of a diversion from giving the boardroom the decision power, where we're saying, okay, obviously that matters. Like you said, it's a business, right? We need to understand the commercials of it. But at the same time, by doing these playtests, we're not saying what is the score that you're giving this. We're actually asking hey, how well does this do the things that you would expect of this kind of game? And we're saying to the players, do you want this? And so we're trying to kind of give the decision-making power almost in two forms. It's the team and their buy-in, and then obviously the commercial side. And then it's, do the players want us to make this game? Is that interesting? So it's for us such a critical part of the process, and the other things are tick marks almost.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I think it can very easily be both, and it's just a case of how you then serve that up and making sure that it goes to the right group of people and gets what both parties need, and how it serves production and marketing. And those can come together quite well with that format, I think.
Yeah.
How do you go from testing a game with an audience, building that golden cohort of players that really are passionate about it, and then say, okay, we've greenlit this game, great, we're going to build this game now. We'll see you in 2 years. How do you bridge that gap?
Well, we don't wait 2 years to bring them back. But no, I think, like I said, regular and often testing is really important, but also keeping people interested and invested long term. So giving them that carrot to kind of keep along and stay as part of the community, and giving them other content to interact with, like things that they would be interested in. So not just on that game, maybe there are other games they should check out that we're testing out. So I think we're looking at it in a few ways, but yeah, it's a challenge because players don't have necessarily a really long attention span to wait unless it's like the exact game that they've been waiting for their entire life. For a random game that they play test, they're probably not going to be checking in every 2 weeks saying what's the latest, unless you really serve it to them in a way that they're going to care about.
Yeah, I think it's all about momentum, really, because you want that kind of run into your launch week to be the culmination and the kind of real kind of wave of it, kind of activity ramping up to that day one of launch. And if you go kind of too big too early, you kind of risk that kind of fatigue and kind of, your game just becoming white noise when something else more interesting comes. So sometimes it's quite good just to kind of go dark and then come back in when you have a plan where you kind of go, right, we have our window, we know how long we've got to go, we know we've got a kind of strategy and a kind of pathway of assets that are going to help kind of start kind of getting the snowball running of community, building up our Discord, or kind of building up views on our trailers and telling the story that we want to, and making sure that right when we hit our peak, that's when we launch the game. So we've kind of given it every opportunity for the game to kind of hit that kind of maximum audience. And I think, there's always that concern about content just for content's sake. And I just think, that there are lots of examples and times where, a steady stream of information works really well, especially those for kind of where there's a personal connection maybe with the developer. And, there's kind of people to build that connection. But as long as you kind of have something like that in mind, and you're doing it for the right reasons, and you're building it towards that plan, then it's something to have in mind.
All right, so now we have the community. We've communicated what we're trying to do with them. We've built them a game to play. How do we go ahead and now actually collect and action on that feedback? We've talked a lot about gut feeling. Jamin, you mentioned that's a big part of your side of things, of your publishing business. Gustav, you're lean more into the data. Where does Avalanche fall on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I said before, it's kind of, you have to take all of these different inputs. And so if I think about how we collect feedback from our players, and now I'm going to switch back to the live game. So for the Hunter Call of the Wild, the vast majority of our really engaged community wants to talk to us in Discord. And so that is where we want to be talking to them. The community managers are obviously there, regularly interacting, but bringing the developers in as well kind of gives people a really exciting moment to give us a great amount of feedback, because they feel like that's kind of the most direct input that they get. So for example, last year we did a vote on what should be the next weapon pack. And we let the community vote on what content they wanted to see in there, what kind of weapons, and it was one of our highest selling packs then when we put it out 9 months later, because they felt like they had ownership over it. So I think for us, it's collecting anecdotal information from the Discord, it's collecting community sentiment through tools, monitoring tools. It's also about putting surveys in, collecting regular feedback there, but then again, bringing it back to the bigger picture telemetry, and all of these inputs then going into the developer plan where they can parse it in the way that makes sense for, again, their knowledge and their experience.
Gustav, you're building a game inside another platform. What are the restrictions there that you have sort of when you're trying to create like a holistic view of your player base?
That's a very good question. We have a lot of limitations. Like Roblox is COPPA compliant, which means that we are very limited to reach a large part of the player base and can't really communicate with them. But I think what Emma was touching about, I think, is very interesting. Like, you can build tools into the games themselves. Like, you don't need to communicate with them off-platform. We had a game where we were giving out like free cosmetics, and what we did was that we had already made all of the cosmetics that we were going to release, but in the game we added a station where you could vote for the next cosmetic that you wanted to have. Like we had everything prepared, so there was no shift in like workforce or plans, but we just let them decide when we would release, in which order we would release, and that is a way of getting feedback as well, where we are not limited to means of communication with the players. Like almost every game today is online or have online capabilities, and you should really use that. You should use the game itself as a platform for communication.
And when you're dealing with tens of millions of people giving feedback or tens of thousands of feedback, how do you manage sort of feedback overload? Do you have tools to sort of filter through all of it?
I wish we did. Like, I think we are way more chaotic than maybe my impression gives off, or maybe not. But no, and this is where gut feeling comes back in again. Like you need to be able to filter that. We are lucky enough to work on a platform where we are like, yeah, we're gonna slowly release, or we just put this game live and see what happens, and we get 5,000 players every day without doing anything. I understand that not every platform is like that, but for us, that is enough to see kind of the trends of it going forward. But then it comes back to gut feeling and like being confident enough in what you're doing.
Jamin, when you talk about the way you build games, I feel you probably, I think you give a sense that the games you're publishing are artwork. Art is often a one-sided conversation where the artist creates something for us to experience. But we also want feedback, right? We want to improve the game. How do we avoid sort of having sort of the feedback cycle and listening be performative?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think a lot of it comes down to, genre and, collecting all these brilliant data points and all those inputs that we can collect from is obviously hugely important. But the world that I have been in more recently is, narrative and world and character, and there's less of that. Less of those inputs to draw from, actually. So you do have to be more anecdotal, and it is more qualitative. So I've used lots of tools in the past and wrangled lots of data, but I think for me the most powerful thing in terms of getting that most authentic, non-performative, response is being there, over somebody's shoulder, watching them play. And for people, showcasing at events like this, that is the most powerful form of feedback you can get, as long as you're not obviously leading. If you need to be, slightly divorced from the playtest itself. But there's some great tools out there. I'd give a shout out to Go Testify if anybody's used that, which is just fantastic. Your playtesters literally narrate their experience with the game, and then the timeline basically can show you where the pain points are, and you can scrub to that big red bit where you can see there's a real issue with the onboarding. So there's some really good stuff out there. But I think during that, if we do move that forward to then open development, and when you've got these playtests that are live and actually part of your marketing campaign, that's when I think that the pruning of the messaging and making sure that you take forward the correct messages for the team and being a buffer. Actually, I think a lot of my job has been in being a buffer to the dev team, because I'm more in the brand and marketing world here and coming at it from a slightly different angle. But not all feedback is equal, and I think we've kind of touched on that in this panel already. But I think making sure that your dev team is shielded from what is going to be confusing, or what is going to be a distraction, or what is going to get them away from that core mission of building the game and enacting the creative vision that they have. That's the job of kind of my role in this, I think.
I think sometimes it can be, we talk about the kind of being overwhelmed with data. I remember many years ago, one of the games we worked on, we suddenly had access to all this new information about, from the developer side, about where users were spending more of their time in certain areas, what things they were interacting more with, and it was just and broken down by country, and it was suddenly like, holy shit, there's so much information here. And you could just see people kind of getting kind of overwhelmed by it. And then it's like, okay, what you need to do is take a step back, ask a question of the data, and then see if the data reinforces that. So I think that can be an approach to when you just have too much data, or you feel like you've got too many kind of, different kind of channels of noise coming to you. Like, take a step back. What is the question that's kind of interest to you the most, and just see if the data kind of supports or contradicts that, and then let that kind of take you on the journey.
Do players want to interact with community managers or developers more? What's your experience? Do they care? Do they notice a difference?
I think it can depend on the channel. I think different channels have different types of voices from the community, and that can be different in terms of where that's best channels. So, I think, community on Reddit is probably better kind of serviced by someone from the development team, because it's a very kind of focused group of people interested in a very kind of niche bit of information that kind of a developer can talk to with authenticity. But maybe from a more of a commercial channel like TikTok or an X, that's probably better handled from a community point of view, because there's a lot of noise, not all good, that can kind of be quite damaging to people that aren't best trained or kind of come from that world.
Yeah, I think you do want to shield developers, I think, from some channels as well, where I do think generally the people playing the game want to interact directly with the people making the game. But you probably don't want to throw your developers headfirst into your Steam comments or Twitter, whereas, something like Reddit or Discord can be a bit more controlled.
Maybe there are so many bad examples of when a developer is kind of taken the bait, as it were, and then it's all kind of blown up from there, and it's not good for anybody.
Before we move into a few minutes of Q&A, I had one last question for you, Greg. You've worked at Rockstar, Bethesda, and Team 17, right? Do you think that these sort of legacy publishers that have been around for a little bit longer can adapt to this new world where players are much more involved in the development process?
I think, there are three different types of publishers, and I think some of them don't have to do any change at all, because they're just they are what they are, and they'll always be that way, and they don't need to change because they're just all encompassing. And then there are others which have kind of had a strategy and game plan in place and have kind of found the position they're in by choice. And then there are others where they do need to be reactive. So I don't specifically want to call out previous employers and stuff, but I think it just depends on the scale and ambition of those publishers and the type of games that they're working on as well, right? I think if you're working on a big AA, AAA game, there are certain factors at play that you need to be more conscious of. A great example is obviously Sony and Concord, and kind of missing the boat on that live service game, and obviously being very committed on that. And then you've obviously got publishers that are working with lots of independent studios, and are moving quickly because the developers are making games really quickly that are dictating whole new genres and whole new subsets of genres, and are moving the market forward, which is something that those big AA, AAA studios aren't really trying to do, because the development resource that they're putting behind it are just so much more vast. They can't move. It's a bit like trying to turn a cruise liner versus a speedboat, right? In terms of the turning circles.
Yep. Awesome, thank you. Well, we have a few minutes of Q&A. If there's anyone in the audience that has a question for these fine folks. I can't see, but maybe there's someone with a microphone. Anybody at all? Got one right in the middle there. Good luck getting to him.
How important do you find the ability to create content within the game? Is that a marker for success, or is it could it potentially be a double-edged sword?
Do you mean players creating content like UGC?
Yeah, exactly.
I think it really depends on the game and how you want your players to interact. Our game with the Hunter does not have this, and yet we have a really healthy and alive community. However, I think it's a really great way to have players feel ownership or be able to create a hobby around your game and create longer investment and engagement tracks. So, I think it's broadly a really great thing, but not every game probably has the capabilities or resources to invest into building it out. It's probably the biggest blocker, I would say.
Yeah, I think when I hear UGC, you think of, assets and things that are kind of tangible in these game worlds. And I think a lot of the time, player, creative expression can be many things. And, the world that I work in, having tools in engine where players can create their own content is rare, just because, again, the resource kind of threshold is too high. But definitely look for, experiences that allow that creative expression, and that can take many forms. For me, it's about player stories, and can the player who is engaging with your systems create a story from that and with that, because then that can be shared, that creates dialogue, that creates conversation, that creates community. So for me, sort of UGC and player expression are almost, two halves of the same coin kind of thing. But I'm sure Gustav has got better direct examples of that.
Yeah, and this is an interesting question to me, because I work on what people call like the UGC space. We are professional developers, so we are not like players that started making mods. And to me, I would say, no, it's not important at all for our games, because our games are targeted towards players that just want to have fun. Like if they want to create games, the tools are available to them. We don't need to make those tools. Like they can just make their own games on Roblox as a platform, or UEFN with Fortnite if they want to go through some pain. But so no, to us, no, it's not important at all. It's not something that we look at. But I think you have a very interesting point. Like we are creating experiences that live in a world where people can create content outside of the game. They don't need to code or make models, but they will. We have a lot of people recording gameplay and doing like role playing in our games and building a story and then posting on YouTube. Like that is one of our major traffic drivers. Like people creating content out of the game world and in the game IP.
I think that's what I really love about certain types of games, and we did this in. My first game was, it was an open world skiing and snowboarding game. So we built in a photo mode and a video mode where first you could rewind the gameplay, which was a little overly complex, but it was great. And then you could detach the camera from the player character and position it where you want, change the focal length, and then replay in slow motion so players could capture gameplay of them doing whatever they wanted, and it created an entire community of people making edits of them riding down the mountain.
Yeah, I think that is very important to think about what people will do that are not like, we make games, that's what we do. Like, but there are other forms of medium in this game world and with this IP, and encourage that. Like you did with your game.
Yeah, what would the players want to do organically anyway, right?
Yeah. I think to echo some of the points made, I think where there's a will, there's a way, and regardless of whether you've incorporated it or not, I think if your game has been engaging and kind of really kind of brought that player into your game world, they'll find a way regardless, and they'll create their own stories within that. And then I think maybe you can be reactive or kind of factor that in for something, another project. And I think a great example of that is like the role play with GTA. I mean, like that's something that kind of came from nowhere, and I remember kind of just watching it and being like, this is wild. There's people out there role playing as police officers and kind of civilians, and the numbers behind it in terms of the views was just astronomical. And then obviously fast forward to somewhat recently, and Take-Two have kind of purchased that kind of initial company, and so I think that's something that just wasn't ever kind of, I don't think, factored or considered into the kind of that kind of process of the game. But the world was so compelling, that's what the kind of community have done.
Great. Maybe one more question over here.
What are your approach to toxic members of the community and people who start either creating toxic content or being toxic within the community and towards developers?
Don't feed the trolls.
Yeah.
Emma?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is don't feed the trolls, right? Having very strict guidelines and expectation setting, boundaries that your community team is empowered to actually act upon. And so I think that can be one of the challenging pieces, right, is having the right tools for them to act on an individual who's acting out of bounds. So just making sure that you have those in place to make their lives a little bit easier and keep the community healthy.
I think the only exception to that is Ryanair. I don't know if you've ever seen any of their kind of community management, but they really are like just stuffing food down the trolls' necks in terms of just kind of handling that. But no, I think, I think it's good for a company to have a stance, and I think it's good for a company voice to address something widely. But I think, from individual point of view, I don't think you should ever try and engage because it never works out very well.
Yeah. And obviously connecting to the previous question, if you are building a game that has a player creation element, you obviously need the technology to be able to support UGC in your game, which is quite a robust architecture, but also then moderation of that content. Obviously a humble plug to my own company, LootLocker. That's what we do. All right, well, thank you to the panelists, thank you to the questions and the audience for joining us this late afternoon, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your show. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and the panel. Very interesting learnings. Hopefully you all could take something away for how to implement UGC for your communities. It's been quite a stacked program today. We've learned how to use WYs, how to implement Dolby Atmos in our games. We've learned how World of Warcraft has kept reinventing itself. We've heard about the creative process behind making games, and also how to adapt Agile to your game development, among other sessions. This marks the finale for today's program, but we will be back tomorrow with me. As much as it's been an honor to be your stage host today, I will leave the reins tomorrow as I bring on my business hat and my consulting hat with a talk about the essential AI combat systems you put in your modern action games. Tomorrow you will be guided instead, as I pass the torch, to Matilda Smedius, voice actor in Overwatch, who will guide you through the program. There are quite a couple of interesting highlights tomorrow. Among others, we will see Joseph Fares, creative director and co-founder on Hazelight, to talk about Split Fiction, the recent hit. We will hear a fireside chat with Peter Molyneux, industry legend, co-founder of Bullfrog, who also invented the God game genre, for those who remember that one. We'll have Chelsea Blasco talk about leadership in games. And we will have Stay Curran, who usually kills the game industry, but is now saving the game industry. So that should be quite an interesting session that will maybe, pay up for some pass-ins or something like that. For those of you who are here in the theater, there is a dev mixer going on right now by Unity in the hall by the showcase stage. I believe it goes on until 7, so you do still have a chance to catch that one.